today's episode of Free Pilot Training, I'm going to show you in detail how to master turns around a point. Welcome to Free Pilot Training. I'm Josh and this is my father-in-law Mike. And today I'm going to show you how to perform one of the ground reference maneuvers that you could be required to perform on your check ride. Turns around a point. Now the FAA requires instructors to teach ground reference maneuvers because these teach you to account for wind when you're controlling an airplane. Flying an airplane is nothing like driving a car, and there's a bunch of reasons for this, but the main reason is that wind can really affect your direction of travel and how fast you're moving over the ground. You know, I'd say that flying an airplane is more like steering a boat than driving a car. If I want to drive my boat over here and the current is moving this direction, I have to steer more like this in order to travel this way. The same applies to flying an airplane. We have to account for wind speed and direction when we're flying. If I want to travel in a straight line this direction and I have wind coming from this direction, then I have to crab into the wind in order to fly that straight line. In addition to that, I have to account for wind speed. And that's because when I make a turn, my speed over the ground, or ground speed, is what determines my ground track. Because the faster an object is moving, the larger the turn radius is. So if I have a headwind and my ground speed is really slow, I will turn in a shorter distance than if I have a tailwind and my ground speed is higher. Because of that, when we make turns and we're trying to make a ground track that resembles a circle, what we do on this side of the circle is going to be different than what we do on this side of the circle. And that's exactly what a turn around a point is. We're literally making pretty circles around a point we pick on the ground. So let's talk about getting set up for this maneuver. Remember, before we do anything else, we need to make sure that we clear the area. Before we perform any maneuvers, I'm just going to go ahead and knock out some clearing turns, and then I'll be watching for traffic constantly for the rest of the maneuver. Alright, clear left. Look clear, I'm not seeing anybody out here. Let's make a couple turns that are more than 90 degrees, and then come back, and we'll do a couple maneuvers here. Did pretty good that direction. Oh. Clear right, going back to the right. You seen anybody on ADSB there?
Not anywhere close.
Okay. Clear right, coming right. Now before we start the maneuver, remember what I just said. We need to account for wind if we want these turns around a point to resemble a circle. Otherwise, it's going to look like a toddler made these things. Your instructor is probably going to show you some tricks for determining wind direction once you get out to the practice area. But I've never really been good at telling which way the wind is blowing by just looking at the grass. You can use the GPS and whatever tools you have in the cockpit, but I like to tell my students to grab the winds from the nearest airport and just use those because I think that's the easiest thing to do. Next, we need to pick an altitude between 600 and 1,000 feet AGL. So if the elevation in this area is around 700 feet, 1,400 feet MSL is a good altitude to perform this maneuver. Just keep in mind it's not uncommon to see towers in excess of 1,000 feet AGL. So in addition to traffic, you should also keep a close eye out for towers as well. Now, once we've picked an altitude, we need to stick with it. If you look at the airman certification standards, you'll notice that you must maintain your altitude within 100 feet. And we also have to maintain our airspeed within 10 knots. Okay, but what airspeed should we fly? Oddly enough, there's nothing that tells you the airspeed that you need to fly when you perform this maneuver. The Airplane Flying Handbook explains how you should accomplish the maneuver, and the Airman Certification Standards tell you that you must maintain your airspeed within 10 knots, but you actually get the privilege of picking the airspeed you want to fly. Just think about what your stall speed is going to be if you bank up to 45 degrees. And I would personally keep it below maneuvering speed or VA. For today, I'm just going to fly this maneuver at 90 knots. This gives me a good stall buffer and it's below my maneuvering speed, so I know for sure that I'm not going to over-G the aircraft. And all I'm going to do is set my power so it'll hold 90 knots, maybe put in 100 RPM as I start the maneuver and then just leave it there throughout the rest of the maneuver. And then I'm going to pick up my reference point and then I'll enter the maneuver with the wind. Now the Airman Certification Standards do not specify that you need to enter with the wind. It only says that you need to apply adequate wind drift correction during straight and turning flight to maintain a constant ground track and radius of turn. But the Airplane Flying Handbook says that you should enter the maneuver downwind. And the reason they tell you to do that is because if you enter downwind every time, it's going to be a lot easier to figure out what you need to do. If you enter into the wind one time and then you enter from a crosswind the next time, you will struggle making nice pretty circles.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. If I push it any harder, the whole thing will blow.
Okay, now let's talk about how to perform this maneuver. Keep in mind, it's super easy to get into the weeds on how to do this. But after I explain it, I'll give you a couple secrets that I think you're going to find helpful. Alright, once I pick the point I want to fly around, then I need to decide how big I want to make the circle. I personally recommend making the turns with a radius between 1/4 and 1/2 mile. When you're first getting started, I would make the circle a little bigger because it seems like that's a little bit easier. But play around with a few different sizes and see what works best for you. Now, keep in mind you can make turns around a point either to the right or to the left. It doesn't matter. But most pilots typically find left turns easier because it's way easier to see your reference point from the left seat. But once again, play around with this and see what works best for you. Remember, we're entering with the wind. So as we begin the maneuver, we need to keep that in mind for two reasons. First, as we pass our reference point, we'll be getting pushed by the wind as we make the turn. This means that we need our bank to be very steep so we don't get pushed too much. In addition to that, right here is where our ground speed is going to be the fastest because we're moving with the wind. This is important because the turn radius around our point is directly related to our ground speed. Because of that, when we first make the turn, this will be our steepest bank. But as we start to get perpendicular to the wind, we need to reduce our bank because our ground speed is reducing. But we're still going to be getting pushed, so we don't want to reduce it too much. As we start to roll out into the wind, this is where we really need to shallow out our bank. When we're flying into the wind, our bank should be at its shallowest point throughout the entire maneuver because our ground speed is at its slowest, and we're getting pushed back from this headwind. But as we continue the turn from the headwind to a crosswind, we need to steepen that bank back up because once again we're getting pushed from the side. But this time, the wind is pushing us into our reference point, not away from it. So we want to continue that medium bank turn until we end up where we started. Don't forget to stay coordinated when making these turns. Remember, our rudder pedals should be tied to the ailerons because of adverse yaw. But the left turning tendencies shouldn't be too bad during this maneuver because you're moving a little bit faster. But you still need to consider them because they're not completely gone. Now, I like to have my students make at least 2 turns because it really helps them start developing a feel for the wind. Unless the winds are calm, it's usually pretty tough to nail this maneuver on the first turn, especially in strong winds. Because of that, make as many turns as you want, then to complete the maneuver, you want to continue straight ahead at the point where you started. Now, that's the way that the FAA wants me to explain it to you guys. But it seems like every time I explain it that way, students are more confused than they were before. Because of that, I'm going to show you a couple ways that I like to explain it that seems to make a little bit more sense to everyone. By the time you're watching this video, you probably have a pretty decent feel for the controls on your airplane. Because of that, one method that many instructors like to teach is to simply pick out your reference point and then pick out other points around that point that are equidistant from that, and just fly directly over those. For example, if I choose this intersection as a reference point, I might fly over this tree line here at the beginning. Then, as I make this first turn, I might fly over this tree line over here that's the same distance as the other one. Then, I'll fly slightly to the right of this road and then this other tree line over here. Then I'll fly back over my original point. Once again, I like to make at least 2 turns so I can try and feel what the wind is doing. Remember, we need to maintain the altitude that we chose at the beginning of the maneuver. And we chose 1,400 feet MSL because that's between 600 and 1,000 feet AGL. And we're mostly going to be doing that with our elevator and our ailerons. And that's because we're on the front side of the drag curve. And that also means that we're going to be controlling our airspeed with power. Hopefully we can talk more about the front side and the back side of the drag curve in a future episode because those are super important when it comes to energy management. Now, when I'm performing this maneuver, I'm mainly looking at my reference point. Then I'm taking quick glances inside at my altimeter, then back outside. I might periodically peek at my airspeed, but if I set my power correctly, I shouldn't have to mess with that too much. Also, don't forget to look straight ahead as well to make sure you're not going to run into something in front of you. And then I'll just exit straight ahead where I started the maneuver. Okay, but maybe I don't have any points around my reference point that I can use to help me gauge my distance. Now what? Maybe you're getting your license in the desert or something. In this case, you can use the oblong method. This is the way I like to think about turns around a point. I don't know of anyone else that teaches this method, but it works for me when I'm flying them, and maybe it'll work for you too. Remember, the wind is pushing us, so if we want to draw a perfect circle with our airplane, we cannot simply fly the airplane in a circle. I like to imagine more of an oblong shape like this and fly around my point using controls that should make this shape instead of a circle, if there were no wind. As I enter the maneuver, I turn early because I'm getting pushed and my ground speed is faster. But because the wind is pushing me, I end up being where I need to be. As I continue my turn, I'm slowly taking a little bank out because I'm getting pushed by the wind over here. Depending on the wind, I may not need any bank over here for a little bit on this side. And I'm going to be driving directly into the wind, so I don't want to turn too early. If I turn too early, this could cause me to get pushed over my point as I make my next turn. Then I need to increase my bank so I don't get pushed closer to my reference point. And then I'll be right back where I started. Now this method is awesome for two reasons. First, if the wind is stronger, you simply make your oblong bigger, and that will account for the wind. Second, this method works no matter what direction the wind is blowing. If you aren't entering a turn with the wind, you simply imagine the oblong shape with the long edge in line with the wind direction. And if you fly that shape, you should end up with a perfect circle. Okay, now that you know that, let's go back out to the plane and make a couple turns around a point. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to enter this maneuver with the wind. Winds are out of the north today, so I'm going to get myself set up, and there's a point behind us here, so we're going to kind of come around. And looks like we got a decent little intersection over there with a pond beside it. And so we want to get down to our altitude of 600 to 1000 AGL. So 1400 MSL is a good altitude today for us on this maneuver. So I'm getting down to 1400 right now. I'm getting set up so I can enter the maneuver with the wind. I'll be entering to the south because the winds are from the north. That just makes it easier to perform this maneuver. So this is not our point.
Helicopter 273, Charlie Alpha is 5 southeast.
That's Pogue. We don't care about them right now. They're a long ways away. All right, so there's our point over there. Kind of hard to see, but I'm going to get a set up here. Coming up on our altitude of 1400 feet, I want to fly this maneuver at 90 knots. So we'll just set a good power setting. Looks like maybe about 2200 is a good power setting for this. Let me get back down here. 2200. So we're going to use this reference point right here, this little road. Alright, so 90 knots, looks like 22's holding that here, 2200 RPM. So this is going to work out good. I'm entering with the wind right now. And I'm planning on making two turns. So our point is this intersection, so we're getting pushed with the wind. Our ground speed's faster and we're getting pushed. So this is going to be the steepest part of our turn. So we'll start our turn here. Might be getting a little slow, so I'll put in a touch of power. And now, as we kind of run perpendicular to the wind, we can roll out a tiny bit, but we're still getting pushed, so we don't want to roll out too much. We're looking at our point out there, putting that wing just above it. And then as we start entering with the wind here, we're going to roll out a little bit because our ground speed is going to be slower, but we're also going to be getting pushed, so we kind of need to roll out a little bit here. All right, and then we'll kind of start that turn a little bit here. And then as we start getting in an area where we're pushed, we're going to steepen that bank back up. This is like a moderate bank, moderately steep. Looks like about 30 degrees is what we're after right now. And then I'll come back over here. I'm climbing a little bit. I'm getting a little slow. I'm getting pushed a little bit. Winds are more out of the northwest. All right, so this is our steepest bank yet again. Coming back around, steeper, steeper, steeper. As we start getting on this side over here, we'll roll out just a little bit. And then we'll start shallowing out as we get over here when we're going into the wind. Getting a little high, reduce that power, pitch down just a touch. Stay coordinated there. I got a little uncoordinated there for just a second. All right, so now once again we're driving into the wind, so this is going to be our shallowest point. And then we start rolling into that turn. And then we'll slowly start steepening that back up to a moderately steep bank angle. And then we're getting pushed, so we'll steepen that up a little bit. And then we want to just enter in this maneuver the same way we entered, so just straight ahead. Alright, there it is. We'll roll out and enter just straight ahead, and that maneuver is complete. I got a little slow there, got a little low there at the end. But we were well within all the parameters that would have passed the check ride. And that's all you got to do. I hope you guys learned something from this video today. It really means a lot that you guys keep coming back to me for more training. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to smash that like button before you check out another one of my videos that will make you a better pilot. See ya!